So welcome to, I don't know if you can see it, but you're back in familiar neighborhood. This is, actually you can't see so much of it. I should sort of give you the tour. This is the temple at Pancha-Sirsha, what we call the 5-peak mountain. Let me just give you, so you can see here, and then we have, hold on, let me just give you a tour of where you are. All right. Okay, here we have the shrine. And here we then have the rest of the room. And suitably, as this place is called Pancha-Sirsha, Utaishan, or 5-peak mountain, there's a tanka of Manjushri. So there you go. Okay. So you have a little bit of sense of where you're visiting. Some of you are coming from very far, so now you know what the localities are like. Anyway, by the way, if someone can just confirm that you can hear me, yeah, I think you can. Good. So funny, sometimes the software here, it tells you, you know, it talks to you, but sometimes it just chooses not to. One more thing I have to say, we could face some technical difficulties today. Just where I live, they have been putting up they have a tower from which a lot of the internet network is sent from, because there's some people opposed to a new technology that's going to be introduced. Some vigilante went in and burnt the tower. They didn't destroy it entirely, but they managed to damage sufficiently, so it's not broadcasting. But I think nevertheless, it seems that the network out here is working independent of that. So I think we can probably assume that this is going to work, but if it doesn't, this is the reason why. The Molambimbi vigilantes. I went in and asked this kid today what had happened, and he said somebody had gone into this big sort of metal tower at the bottom, poured in diesel, and ignited it. And even though, like I say, it didn't burn down the tower, it managed to damage it. That shows the top of the tower. Actually, up at the top, you can see where all the flames must have come out. So yeah. Anyway, here we are addressing this very issue, which is essentially the sufferings that universally takes place on the basis of like and dislike, attachment and aversion, and so forth. And all of that coming down to simply just not recognizing the actual abiding condition of our reality, which ultimately is beyond this dualistic notion of grasping and grasped, subject, object, perceiver and perceived. And this is very valuable, and we can see the difference between those that realize this and those that don't is essentially samsara and nirvana, and if you like, suffering and peace. So there's every reason to be engaged in this study, and we do so then not just for our own sake, but really understanding how suffering pervades our universe. So we're lucky that we have the Buddha, who actually dedicated himself entirely to penetrating confusion and arrived at a clear understanding of how our reality abides. And as always, I would encourage you to be highly suspicious of such propositions. And I would encourage you to do that, because the more you really check, why should we trust the Buddha? Why should we trust that somebody 2,500 years ago actually penetrated confusion and arrived at perfect insight into reality? You should be very critical about that. And that is why we study the teaching. But it is, I would argue, also the reason why, as we study the teaching, not subscribing to some beliefs because that's comfortable, but really just following really the Buddha's propositions, and also verifying them on the basis of our own experience. We then very possibly could see the value of what the Buddha pointed out. So we've looked at, you could say, increasing degrees of understanding reality. And this is what we call then the progressive stages of meditation on emptiness. There's not the assumption that right away we can have a complete understanding of reality, but what we are using here is our logical mind to essentially subject our perceptions to a critique, to analyze our perceptions and the validity of the assertions, the positions, the way that we develop attitudes, and particularly, of course, how the dualistic mind gets entangled in suffering on the basis of our perceptions and the way that we could say misperceive our perceptions. So that's where we have looked at various ways of understanding reality. Of course, all of it coming back to what we call dependent arising and seeing that everything there is really emerges as perceptions on the basis of what is a web of just causes and conditions, which we then impute, where we impute a solid reality onto these perceptions. But the thing is, the perceptions, they're secondary. The primary, what we can really, you could say, empirically verify as directly knowable is then the knowing mind. Everything else is really secondary. That's, of course, where we get caught, but it's also important in this context that we will really identify the central role of the knower. So without further ado then, meditation procedure. So this is on the basis of us having looked at the Shravaka, Chittamatra, and Svatantrika Madhyamika positions. So in the Chittamatra meditation, we saw that the thing that was empty, Tongshi, the ground of emptiness, was the mind, empty of perceiver and perceiver duality. So that's where we, on the basis of the Chittamatran position that understands how we create both the sense of the object and the sense of the subject, that we then understand there's a non-dual quality of the mind that remains. And that is where then we would still say the Chittamatrans, they're holding on to something. They're still holding on to this knower, the cognizer. And that in some way is not really a problem. The only problem is that, and it's not, we probably would say not all Chittamatrans fall into that trap. But if we were to assert, and some Chittamatrans they do, that this knowing mind, that is something that is substantially or inherently existing, that would actually be another cognitive obscuration. It would still prevent us. It would still provide a reference point, and that would constitute an obstacle to enlightenment. So then the Khenpo goes on to say, in the Svatantrika meditation, i.e. this is now in Madhyamika territory, where we essentially are saying that phenomena ultimately there's nothing that we can actually objectify. Then nevertheless, the Svatantrika meditation, they still would speak about how there conventionally is a perception, and as such, they very much are keen to make assertions about the nature of this non-dual reality on the basis of actually, you could even say compassionately taking into account that some beings would need explanation. And so that's where we say in the Svatantrika meditation, the thing that is empty is all phenomena, inner and outer, i.e. both mental phenomena as well as outer appearing objects. Everything is empty of self-nature. Now we're going to be looking closer at this, where what really defines the Svatantrika is they actually make an assertion. They actually say, well, things don't inherently exist neither outer nor inner. There's going to be then a sort of a more advanced style of Madhyamika that comes along and says, even to make such an assertion still constitutes a cognitive obscuration. Anyway, it's getting a little bit, you could say, finicky and subtle, but that's all right. I have a VPN already, thank you. So anyway, presently with regards to what we've looked at here, it actually constitutes something extremely beautiful, because this is, as soon as we're even in Chittamatran territory and Svatantrika territory, it is really just about us relaxing the grip on our ordinary concepts. So the Khenpo says, begin the meditation session with taking refuge and arousing bodhicitta. Okay. Good. Then he says, then having established certitude by listening, studying, and reflecting, abandon all thoughts and rest the mind in its own emptiness and the emptiness of all phenomena, free from all concepts such as existence, non-existence, and so on. And this really does, you could say, this sums up the whole project of what we're doing. Namely, we listen to the teachings, we hear what the Buddha has to say, we think critically about it, and at that point then we abandon ordinary conceptual thoughts and simply just rest the mind. We rest the mind having already ascertained that we cannot find anything solid within the mind that observes or the observed object, the what we call self of person and self of phenomena. And so we rest without thinking, does it exist, does it not exist, and all of these sort of, you could say, concepts about what we're doing. So that's where we then do something wonderful, which is really just we relax the mind, but we don't just relax it from the point of view of something's out there and we're a bit worried about, you know, when we come out of meditation. We have actually dealt with, is there any concern that could ever be with regards to reality? And as such, it's not escaping into a comfort zone. It's really just relaxing once and for all, having understood, just like if we were in a dream and we suddenly realize, it's just a dream. Then we can relax. Very different from just thinking of meditation as sort of an isolated project. And so the Khenpo says, rest the mind in that vast open space. And just as when one recognizes dreams for what they are, they disappear. That's just like if we know we're dreaming, then you could say, the impact and the authority that the dreams, the perceptions have over us, they lose their grip on us. And so similarly also, we might sometimes when we meditate, simply just coming back to a sense of presence, then all ordinary conceptions just disappear. So everything disappears into the vast expanse of emptiness when one meditates free from conceptual contrivance, nishprapancha. That constitutes meditation in this context. Now, it doesn't mean that everything's going to disappear. Don't worry, the place is not going to disappear, the room is not, the people are not going to disappear, but it simply just means that the concerns, the ordinary fixation is simply just we relax. And so that's where we would say there's appearance, and yet there's nothing about these appearances that we can grasp. There's open space, and yet that doesn't prevent all the various reflections of reality to manifest. So that's how we would meditate. And in some way, the way we're meditating here, sorry, it's really like that. This we could actually apply as the instructions. Of course, there's some fine points, like I said, we're going to be going over, but essentially this constitutes the meditation that we undertake here. It's general Mahayana. So then the Khenpo says, between sessions, so we emerge from meditation, and of course we're going to have to relate to death and taxes. Then we meditate on how things vividly appear, but are empty, and how, though empty, they appear, as dreams appear, even though they're empty. So there's nothing that we have to hold on to, but we just sustain a clarity in which there's perceptions, and yet we're not fixating on these perceptions. The Khenpo says, this emptiness is the nature of the Buddha's Dharmakaya, and also the ultimate nature of all beings. Because of this sameness of nature, beings are able to realize the enlightenment of Buddhas and become Buddhas with the power to work forever at the task of liberating all sentient beings. So the the unconfused condition is the Buddha's Dhammakaya. And we would say the characteristic of this is that it is free from delusion. But other than that, it has no solid characteristics. It's not something that's created. It's not something that can come into existence or go out of existence. And this is then the nature of reality. This is the nature of awakening. And yet that nature is not in any way limited into just retreating into itself, but it is from there that spontaneously it manifests compassionately to work for sentient beings according to their particular dispositions. So that's the meditation, post-meditation, and also you could say sealed with that confirmation of the value of this in terms of this being then the scope of the two kayas, the Buddha's Dhammakaya and the compassionate Drupakaya. So this is extremely valuable. And of course, this is just formulated in a few words. And this is really what constitutes pith instructions. But if we take this together with the study that we've done, then we can see this has tremendous ramifications. On Wednesday, we're going to be celebrating the anniversary of a great master called Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye. So he lived from 1820 to 1892, and he had an enormous impact on Buddhism in Tibet. And his collected works, actually his works extend in so many areas. He was prolific and a great being. Notably, he's mainly just noted for just having been a tremendous personality, but sort of effortlessly, he made a lot of things happen. So Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye is sort of a household name in this neck of the woods. And on Wednesday evening, 6:30, we're going to have a program where we're going to be reading. So Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye was great. A lot came. You could say his legacy is enormous. And what is also extraordinary is then about a year and a half ago, a team of people, notably an extraordinary Australian woman, Dalma Gunther, and a team that she really has handpicked and somehow managed to pretty much, in my opinion, sort of gather a star team of some of the greatest minds within translation and editing and tech and so forth, put together a project called the Khenpo Vision Project, which is intending to translate all of Khenpo Lodrötaye's writings over the next few decades. It's an enormous task, but certainly the team that is assembled there could possibly very well be up for this challenge. And so already within this time, translations have taken place, and we're going to be reading some of these translations. And the first text that's going to be read, and that will actually be yours truly reading that, is actually just a few verses that sum up everything that we've studied here. Everything that we've been looking at here in terms of the various tenets will actually be succinctly summarized in this short poem, basically, by Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye. So just to let you know, in case you want to have everything brought together, then it'll be summarized in that short poem. But I would also say, coming across that short poem, without the background that you have in this material, it would probably leave you somewhat sort of baffled and still sort of somewhat looking for a complete understanding of all the implications in this. But then again, this is what we call pith instruction, in which where we summarize things. So just to announce that's coming up. All right, so as the Khenpo says, thinking of this one dedicates all the merit accumulated through meditating like this to the complete and perfect enlightenment of beings. So stage 4, Prasangika Madhyamika. So the Khenpo says the Svatantrika system is very effective for a first understanding of emptiness, because it cuts through one's attachments to things as real. And this, of course, is not just the Svatantrika system all the way through, but it is, you could say, with the Svatantrika that one is introduced to this notion of complete freedom from anything that could be objectified. However, even though the Svatantrikas themselves think that they teach an understanding that goes beyond concepts, from the Prasangika point of view, their understanding is still subtly conceptual. Okay. It's very unrelenting, isn't it? You'd think that we had sort of arrived at an understanding that things can't be grasped. And in fact, we have, and that is the Svatantrika proposition, to actually arrive at an understanding. But that's also the Prasangika's argument, is that, yeah, you have an understanding, and that's the problem. You still have some conceptual references. So the Khenpo continues, the Prasangikas argue that to establish emptiness through reasoning is a subtle attempt to grasp the ultimate nature with the conceptual mind. Reason shows the conceptual mind is always in error. It can only give a distorted and ultimately self-contradictory version of experience, never the nature of reality itself. Therefore, they refuse to use any reasoning to establish the true nature of phenomena. This is tricky, because what the Prasangikas do, in fact, and they are guilty of that, they do use reasoning, but only to refute others' propositions. They never use reasoning to establish the middle way. So they only use reasoning to, you could say, refute others. Now, this might sound very sort of full of sophistry, and it's really just a valid point. And I thought of it, how we could illustrate this. Now, you know how it is with, and I sort of thought of a situation when people would like to know each other, you know, and you'd like to describe a person. And so you say, well, Peter's like this, you know, and he's like this, and he's like this, and he's like that. And then you meet Peter, and then you have all these ideas of what he's like. But in fact, all these descriptions that you have of Peter actually are just getting in the way of actually getting to know the man. And so at one point, you're sort of dealing with Peter, and you say, well, you're supposed to be like this, you're supposed to be like that. And he might actually finally say, could you please just give up all your ideas and just relate to me as I am? And that's where we actually, in the Prasangika view, is not that we're being particularly, you could just say, difficult or just wanting to have an argument with regards to their refutation of all the, you could say, assertions about reality. But they really just are pointing to the fact that reality can never be known through propositions. So, of course, it's very helpful. Like, for example, if I say, Peter's a terribly nice guy, and here's his address, and here's how we recognize him, etc., right? That's where that is very helpful. And you'll sort of eventually go there, meet the guy, and of course, at that point, it will be probably the experiential aspect will take over. But until then, it is very helpful to have some pointers in which direction to take. So it's not as if they're invalidating all of the various steps that lead to this understanding. But again, to actually really engage in what we refer to as resting in equipoise, resting in the meditation of the bodhisattvas, resting in the middle way, etc. That will never be something that's acquired through language and reference points. It has to be experienced. And so that's where the Prasangikas, they are difficult. And that's where you could say Nagarjuna, he was annoying because he would just refute propositions about reality and he wouldn't actually come up with a proposition himself. And that is exactly like that. You know, we could come and we would meet somebody and we say, well, you're supposedly like this, you're supposedly like that. And the person just can't be bothered to actually say whether they are like that or not. And that's also why we have this famous incident with the Buddha, where we talk about the 14 unanswered questions, where somebody came to the Buddha and said, can we understand the origin of the universe like that? And can we understand the ultimate nature of the universe like that? Can we understand the Buddha like this? Can we understand the mind like that? And the Buddha just kept quiet because it would never really serve any purpose to feed this conceptual mind that just wants to diminish and pigeonhole reality. And that is then very much the spirit of the Madhyamika. And it's then that spirit that is represented in the Madhyamika approach, in which they, like it says here, they say that since the ultimate nature is beyond even the most subtle concepts, nishprapancha, it is misleading to try to establish or prove nishprapancha as a description or a concept that expresses the ultimate nature of reality. Very important point, and of course that is the final word with anything that we know. Let's say persons again. To really know, with the more we know somebody, the less actually we'll be willing to actually, be willing to just sort of sum them up in one line, right? I think we all understand that. At the same time, like I said, it's quite helpful to have some indications. So Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye, he would say, when it comes to understanding the ultimate nature, we can essentially understand the ultimate nature in terms of that which is what we can call categorized or enumerated, conceptual, and that which is beyond concepts. And it's very helpful to have that concept of what reality is not, and to have some understanding of emptiness, have some understanding of absolute truth. And yet the experience of it goes beyond any concepts. So that's why we could say there's two kinds of understandings of the absolute nature. So again, referring to these very uncompromising Prasangika people, the Khenpo says, they are adamant in not positing anything either positive or negative. Some argue that this is a dishonest view, in the sense that one is simply sidestepping issues and refusing to allow opponents to refute one's views. This, of course, is you're sitting with somebody who's disagreeing with everything you say, and yet not making a squeak about what they stand for themselves. So, of course, you could be guilty of them just avoiding. But because we're talking about the ultimate nature of reality, it's very different from, for example, talking politics or just ordinary everyday situations. It is really where we put an end to fundamentalism, to dogma, and so forth. So that's where there's a great value in this. So Khenpo then asserts this. He says, however, there is something very profound in this method. It is quite uncompromising in its systematic refutation of all conceptual attempts to grasp the nature of the absolute. The original Prasangikas in India and Tibet did not assert anything about the relative appearances of phenomena either. They considered the nature of this also to be beyond even the most subtle concepts of existence, non-existence, etc. And that, of course, is also where we then understand the value of, say, the Vajrayana, in which all the relative appearances, they're also engaged without there being any assertions with regards to their nature. And it's on that basis we then engage in the yoga that brings onto the path all perceptions in terms of just the manifestation of the reflections of enlightenment. So that's the logic behind, you could say, the development stage practice, in which then relative appearances, they are seen without any conceptual overlays, simply just as the unity of appearance and emptiness. Now, so that really, this applies to what we call the original Prasangikas. And this is where we talk about Prasangikas. Interesting, this is a Tibetan term. And in India, you didn't really use the term Prasangika and Svatantrika. I think I might have mentioned this before. The term Svatantrikas and Prasangikas, they emerged along the lines of someone called Chandrakirti, who essentially identified how two positions emerged with regards to interpreting Nagarjuna's middle way. There were those, and this came from someone called Bhavivika, who, and we can argue for the sake of communication, made a lot of assertions about what Nagarjuna was saying. And then someone came along called Buddha Palita, and he said, hey, you can't, Nagarjuna's, the very point of Nagarjuna is that he doesn't make any kind of assertion of any kind. And that's valid, they're both valid. But you could say that Buddha Palita's point was really that we have to be uncompromising in terms of understanding what these Madhyamikas are doing. However, we could also say Bhavivika was really just trying to engage in conversation with his contemporaries. So whether or not he he actually himself, in terms of the absolute nature, had assertions or not, that's not entirely, we can't assume that he did that. But in his way of presenting the Madhyamaka, yes, he made what is known as you could say, propositions, and that's where we have that term svatantra, which means something that has an actual assertive proposition. Prasangika just means consequentialists. I mean, they don't say anything, they'll just point out the consequences. So that's where the what happened then is, at the later stage in India, then someone called Shantarakshita, he really unified these two approaches. One was the approach that sort of took into consideration the need for language, the need for establishing the two truths, and so on. And at the same time also understanding the value of the, you would say, complete non-referential understanding of the absolute truth. And this he combined in what we call the Svatantrika Madhyamika that we just talked about. And they were not necessarily making any assertions except just at the level of relative truth. And so the original sort of prasangikas and that we had in Tibet and also in India, they very much operated along the lines of understanding these this sort of way that you could accommodate relative appearances as inseparable from the absolute nature. But then, with the advent of Je Tsongkhapa, and clearly great bodhisattva, he must have seen the need to actually, you could say, counter some of what possibly was then perceived, certainly by himself, as some misunderstandings. And so we have here then the emergence of the Gelug tradition that had a slightly different view than the previous Madhyamikas. So we say that some later Prasangikas, namely the Gelugpa school of Tibet, do hold views concerning the nature of relative phenomena. They establish through reasoning that relative phenomena exist conventionally. So that's where, for example, Tsongkhapa, he would say, you know, a vase is not empty of being a vase, it's just empty of inherent existence. So that's where he would assert that there is a conventional existence of relative perceived phenomena. Slightly different from then the views that the previous Prasangikas had. The Khenpo then says, other Prasangikas are very doubtful that such a system can be considered Prasangika at all. A number of very powerful refutations of the Gelugpa view have been made by both Gelugpa and other scholars, and debate still continues to this day, even now as the Dharma spreads to the West. The debate will certainly continue here. Maybe Western scholars will resolve it, where Tibetans have failed to do so. And yes, we have this nowadays where we would say, as far as Madhyamika goes, the early years in which Buddhist texts, we're talking 1960s, 70s, and 80s, they were predominantly based on the Gelug interpretation. And then from the 90s onwards, there's been a great scholarship around, particularly Jamgön Kongtrul's interpretation of the middle way. So maybe Western scholars will resolve it, where Tibetans have failed to do so. That remains to be seen. We could possibly say something along the lines of discerning between phenomenology and ontology, but I'll leave that to some of the, you can say, the great minds in the field. Anyway, Khenpo then says, we will only be considering the original Prasangika view in this meditation progression on emptiness. That is, we will confine ourselves to refuting all views, but not to asserting any counter arguments, establishing any view on our own. So that's where the Prasangika, like I said, they really just want to show how any attempt to solidify understanding is doomed to fail. So the Khenpo says this amounts to a complete destruction of all conceptual views, leaving one with no alternative other than a non-conceptual view of the nature of reality. Now, this said, this is regarded as the scope of great beings, and some of the reasonings are difficult to find, to follow. And that's why also you would see in the general understanding, the Prasangika view is regarded as one that, even though it's utterly correct, is also slightly, you could say, somewhat intimidating, in that it just has a very sharp logic that doesn't really allow for any assertion of any kind. But then again, it's very much based on being clear on what it is that we're refuting, the notion of a self, the notion of particular realities, and also understanding how some of the, you could say, the premises for these refutations, how they actually apply, how they you could say the argument pervades. So anyway, the Khenpo says the aim of the Prasangika is to silence completely the conceptual mind, allowing the mind to rest in absolute freedom from concepts. Now that sounds nice, right? That's, who wouldn't want that? So in a way, you could say that kind of argumentation is really just putting an end to all philosophical queries and quandaries. So as much as we talk about this as being, you would say, very uncompromising in its logic, there's nothing not to like about what it's really about. So we should really just rejoice in that. So the Khenpo says absolute freedom from concepts is what Prasangikas call emptiness. This, by the way, is interesting because we talk about emptiness and we think about, you could say, essentially this as an objective thing. When we say the glass is empty, we're really just talking about an object. When we say phenomena are empty, we're essentially talking about objects. When we say the self is empty, it's still with regards to us actually asserting this emptiness. So when we say emptiness, it's very much understood in terms of it being the object. What is then, you could say, the recognizer, the one that knows this? Well, that's the subjective quality that we call wisdom. And that is the subjective quality of what we call prajna. And I remember Khenpo Tsultrim Gyamtso, who's very close with Tsongsak and Rinpoche, he came to Australia a few years ago and he was teaching the Prajna Paramita Sutra. The Heart Sutra, Prajna Paramita Sridhaya Sutra. And he pointed out, and I found that very interesting, he said, it's a paradox because this sutra really just talks about objective reality. It says empty of this, empty of that, and so on. You don't know, I know you, and so on. But it's actually only talking about the object. And it also goes into how wisdom is empty also, right? But it is actually not so much about the prajna, but it's more about what we could call the dharmadhatu, or the space of phenomena. So when we're talking about emptiness, it is that we cannot grasp anything. And that is primarily what the Prasangikas, they do. They really just want to show nothing can be grasped. And it is really on the basis of this understanding that nothing can be grasped, that there's a quality inside that takes place, which is then the quality of wisdom, no more delusion, being vaccinated, you know? Just like once we realize that there is no snake, there is just a rope. It's the discerning that knows that there's a subject that is not fooled by the appearance. And similarly also, when we're talking about emptiness in this regard, we're really just looking at the rope and just sort of looking and then going, yeah, this is what it is. There is no snake. And so also with the teachings we have here in terms of emptiness, we're really just identifying how there is nothing actually that we can grasp, and that provides this quality of settling. That actually, we're going to be going more into that when we come to what's called the Shintong, the Jamika, which will be the last, will be sort of the crowning sort of a jewel of the entire approach to understanding emptiness. Anyway, here it does say absolute freedom from concepts, meaning the way that we conceptualize, project onto phenomena, is what Prasangikas call emptiness. The absolute nature of reality is emptiness in that sense only. So it really just means, doesn't mean there's nothing there. That's not what we mean with it. It just means the concepts don't have any validity whatsoever. So the Khenpo says it cannot be established as empty or even as freedom from concepts by the conceptual mind, because that would not be true emptiness or true freedom from concepts. Again, that's actually a relief. We will never understand emptiness intellectually. It's something that has to be experienced. It's just like, again, coming back, you cannot know what the molasses or sugar tastes like unless you've actually tasted it yourself. Until then, you're going to have to just rely on people who says, well, it's not salty. It's not like this, it's not like that, and so on. But to actually experience sugar, or so many different kind of experiences, sweetness, it entirely is not something that can be construed up as a sort of mental image. So we can't understand emptiness as something. It would be still just concepts. The Khenpo says, finally, therefore, the Prasangika is not saying anything about the ultimate nature of reality or of emptiness. That is not the aim of their system. Their aim is to free the awareness of its conceptualizing habit and to let the ultimate nature of reality reveal itself in a totally non-conceptual way. In that sense, it's very similar also to the approach that we have in the Zen and the Chan and Zen tradition. And it's interesting that the Chan and Zen tradition also originates from Nagarjuna. If we look at the lineage of Zen, or Chan rather, when it first came to China, it actually goes back to Nagarjuna. I can't remember if Bodhidharma was a direct student of Nagarjuna, but anyway, what we have in Chan is very much this stopping the conceptual mind. But then again, it's done in a very different way from the way it's done in the general approach that we have in the Indo-Tibetan tradition. And this approach that you have in Chan is generally seen as being going beyond the reasoning mind right from the start. In Indo-Tibetan Buddhism, we would say, want to use the reasoning mind to begin with, to arrive at it. But of course, then once we arrive at where we are now, in terms of Prasangika Madhyamika, yes, that is where we then sort of identify how the conceptual mind, it will never be able to understand what is beyond the concepts. But what we do here, and what you don't necessarily have in the Chan tradition, is then the logical arguments that stop the mind, that realize that we can never objectify anything. So that's where you could say there is this, you could say, overlap between the two traditions of the Mahayana. The Chan tradition, which we refer to as Ningpo Döngi Gyuba, the essence absolute lineage, and then what we have here is Sabmutaju, the profound lineage of the view. The Yogacaryas, by the way, they're referred to as a third kind of view, which is then what we call Gyachin Chuju, which means the vast lineage of practice. And that refers then to the qualities, all the vast qualities of enlightenment, of Buddha nature. Anyway, I'm probably just rambling on. Okay, there's a question here. Now, yes, if you have a question, feel free to go ahead.
That's fine.
That's really complaints.
Yeah. So I just want to check out a summary of my understanding to see if it's kind of fitting with this. So the idea that you're using the conceptual mind as a vehicle, say, across the other shore, you arrive at a certain realization that the conceptual mind actually can't grasp things, so you relax from the striving of the conceptual mind. But until you fully relax that striving, there's activity that disturbs the access to the wisdom. So that activity of conceptual mind has to fully come to rest in order for the wisdom to be available.
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's two aspects to this, because what we're talking about here presently is what we call view. And that's where we, from the outset, as we're crossing the ocean, we know that any kind of conceptual activity and reference point will be flawed. And so from the outset, we need to know that. And that is where the Prasangikas are going. Yeah?
That's the difference between Chan and this approach, where instead of dismissing with the validity of the conceptual mind as a way to apprehend reality, they're saying take it as far as you can take it, get clarity with the view, and then surrender it.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's correct, and that's where we would say the Chan approach is then referred to as something that's more the scope of greater beings, and that's where the Tibetans, they decided really that it's too tricky to start that, and you could end up with just having a blank. If you say let's abandon the reasoning mind from the start, it's a big danger that you just sit there and just think.
You don't have the view.
You don't actually have certainty of the view. That's right. So certainty is such a big concept, but of course, if there's a really great being who is introduced to this, you could say that condition which is beyond concept, they really appreciate what that is. But if it's practiced in a wider sense, it could really just become a whole movement of just sitting with mind just blank and nothing happening. Yeah? So that's why the Tibetans were quite adamant of taking the gradual path. But of course, eventually they arrive at the same place as the Chan people would do. Yeah. So the Khenpo says it is a very powerful system in that it gives the conceptual mind nothing to grasp onto at all. In contrast to the Svatantrika, which is good for refuting non-Buddhist systems, the Prasangika is very good for refuting subtle views held in other Buddhist systems. And that's where then the Prasangikas, they would refute some of the, what we call the Samicca, and also the Yogacarya systems. It shows how, although they all claim to go beyond concepts, they still have subtle concepts as long as they try to establish the nature of reality through reason and the use of concepts. Okay. And we're actually going to get into some of these dreaded, the argumentation of the Prasangikas. Let's just see here, but I might leave that to next time. Let's just see if there's some questions here. Okay. Wow, there's certainly a few questions today. Jolly good. Okay. So thanks for the Peter example. A great example of how the potential problems with preconceptions. And then we'll say maybe the avoiding is the avoidant attachment style. Maybe. Are you muted, Jakob? I can't hear you. Sorry, it was me. Okay. Are you a Sautrantika? What do you identify as? Ah, that's interesting. I'm very sympathetic to the Svatantrika, actually. But by the way, yeah, it's actually Svatantrika. And it's a little bit confusing because there's something called the Sautrantika. So beware of that. But anyway, yes, I like the Svatantrika a lot, actually. And a little bit share that with a few others, I think. But anyway, Svatantrika, they accommodate some of us Madhyamikas who are very interested in how the phenomenal world actually plays out, because inevitably in the modern context, we would be looking at how relative truth is understood, how our experience, how the phenomenal world is understood. So we would be looking for an explanation. To just say, well, nothing inherently exists, that's also terribly wonderful, and that is rather Zen. And that's where we would really not get much further than the sort of you could say slightly glib Zen cliches of saying, well, it's like one hand clapping and all of that. If we just say, oh, everything is just beyond concepts, nothing is inherently existing, and all relative truth is really just, you could say, child's play, then it doesn't really engage in a conversation. And that's where the Yogacarya the Yogacarya explanation of our perceptions is rather helpful. And so the Svatantrikas, they endorse the Yogacarya way of explaining relative truth. And so hence, yes, I'm guilty of having strong Svatantrika sympathies. Dear Jakob, a new book on Buddhism, which we translate, summarizes, there are two realist schools. There is Vibhashika and Sautrantika, and two non-realist schools, Yogacarya and Madhyamika. Do you see that is a valid definition? I feel it may not be very realistic. Yeah, it works. I mean, all of these labels, they work particularly within their own context of explanation. But yes, and what we in this work call Shravaka sums up the Vibhashika and Sautrantika positions, because they do endorse, you could say, an external reality in terms of what we say, extended realities, that there is actually something out there that's solid in space, and also in terms of time, that there is a cognizer. Even however minute the moments might be, there is an actual moments of cognition. So of course, what we would say relative truth is that we string all of these together and then have, you could say, images that constitute our perceptions. But if we analyze, there are individual singular moments, and these are singular moments of cognition. And to understand that then is absolute truth. So these are what we then call the realist schools. They assert some reality. The non-realist schools, yeah, they are Yogacarya and Madhyamika. That's also valid because they essentially say there is nothing out there except what the mind is creating. The Yogacarya, they map that whole process in which the mind then, you could say, experiences, but they're still making a point that it's not something real. So we could say they're non-realist. And of course, the Madhyamika, in not having any assertion about any reality, they also are there. So I think it's a fine working definition, but of course there's subtle points that come into play, and sometimes some of the Madhyamikas, they'll sort of argue that Yogacaryas are, you know, they have a little bit of realism going for them, but not really. I don't think so. So I would be comfortable with that definition there. Could you repeat the three lineages again? Yogacarya is lineage of the vast. Yes, sure. And you know, this is a little bit, you could say, unusual, because in Tibetan Buddhism, we generally just talk about two lineages. But I was very fortunate, thanks to Jigme Khenpo Rinpoche. Some years ago, he introduced me to some writings by a great master in the Kato tradition who identified this third lineage. And it is clearly something that is known, but not widely known in Tibetan Buddhism. But usually we talk about two lineages, right? One coming from Nagarjuna, one coming from a Sangha. One is known as Madhyamika, one is known as Yogacarya. One is the one from Nagarjuna, the Madhyamika, we say this is the lineage of the profound view. The one coming from a Sangha, the Yogacarya, is what we call the lineage of vast activities. The third one, Nyingpo Döngi Gyuba, is then the lineage, the lineage of the absolute lineage of essence. And that is more for the advanced scope. Still, we're talking Mahayana. We're talking Prajna Paramita. We haven't gone into Vajrayana. Vajrayana, you could say, takes things even further in terms of profundity, because it operates with the scope of wisdom. Here, within the Prajna Paramita, we are essentially all about refuting the dualistic mind. So that's where there are different ways of doing that. And the most profound way is then this way that doesn't employ reason. And that's then the way that Chan, which was introduced to China through Bodhidharma, and that then eventually moved to Japan as Zen. Do concepts lead to insight, and insight to wisdom, though? Well, we can kind of equate insight and wisdom, but yes, we're using concepts by themselves, they actually perpetuate samsara. But we can use our concepts, and on the basis of our, you could say, capacity for discerning, we can identify what are constructive concepts and what are destructive concepts. But what we are doing here in this context, we are using rational thinking to essentially dismantle our belief in thoughts. So you can see it's thoughts actually used as a remedy for thoughts. Is wisdom a result of conceptual mind? It's not a separate thing. Wisdom is not a result of conceptual mind. Wisdom is what abides, you could say, beyond the veils of conceptual mind. And it is that potential that we are pursuing on the path. So we have a nature which is uncontaminated, clear, you could say, primordially knowledgeable, primordially unconfused, and this we could call wisdom. Whereas when we're on the path, engage the conceptual mind, we do so really from the point of view of dismantling our, you could say, belief in the ordinary conceptual mind, and come to a place where we experience that which is beyond the conceptual mind. So this is rather subtle, and this is where then it's helpful to, on one hand, try to understand the concepts that apply here, and then also rely on the guidance of a teacher when it comes to the actual practice. What can we do daily to build on emptiness? Well, we would say emptiness we can equate really with wisdom. And that's where we would say in the Buddhist path, we work with the wisdom of hearing, reflecting, and meditating. So on the Buddhist path, we're always encouraged to undertake studies and also to meditate. Studies will help us begin to understand how our confusion comes about and also how we can remedy this. And it will not just intellectual confusion, but also our afflictions, how we suffer. So that's where to have this initial theoretical foundation is very helpful. And that's why in the Buddhist teaching, we do operate with a bit of theory. And then we also practice meditation really to allow a space in which this ordinary conceptual mind can find some rest. And the more we study, the more we can see the value of doing that. And the more we meditate, the more we begin to know what the theoretical teachings are saying. So it works very well together. So in our everyday life, spend some time studying the teachings and spending some time meditating. Okay. Okay, we'll conclude it. Oh, wait a minute, there's more. Ah. Okay, well, that's good. Let's see here. Okay. Okay, no more questions now. It's cutting off here at 6 o'clock. So I'm going to include the last ones there that came in 6:01. Okay. Is the Vajrayana supposed to be the lightning path, quickest path? Did I understand you correctly when you said Chan is even more cutting through than Tibetan? Well, the Tibetans, when I'm talking about the Tibetans, I'm talking about the Mahayana traditions. I'm not talking about the Vajrayana. So when I'm talking about those two lineages, the lineage of the Madhyamika and Yogacarya, these are within, you could say, the general Mahayana. So they are, you could say, within the Mahayana. Then you could say Chan is more subtle, but also the Tibetans opted for the gradual path that you have in the Yogacarya and the Madhyamika, because they say it's too dangerous to just think you right away can dispense with reason. So they very much encouraged this, you could say, educated approach. So then we're just talking Mahayana here. The Vajrayana is different. And the Vajrayana, of course, is founded on the insight that's gained from the Mahayana path in general. But then Mahayana is based on the actual experience of what we call co-emergent wisdom, that which is beyond the ordinary conceptual mind. And that's where it then engages the phenomenal reality and also ourselves on the basis of an insight into this you could say, unconditional purity. So the Vajrayana from the start acknowledges this insight of purity, the way that things exist free from our conceptual constructs. And that is very quick, because then we're no longer working with the, you say, process of just entirely relying on the, you say, exhaustion of the conceptual dualistic mind. But remember this, and this is such an important point, the Tibetans pragmatically engage both these approaches. They approach what we call the gradual path of the sutra and the resultant path of mantra. This unity of sutra and mantra is really the defining nature of what we could call Tibetan Buddhism. So we have both of these together. So before you engage in the Vajrayana, you need to have a proper understanding and experience of the sutra path. Would you say Chan is like Dzogchen? No, because Chan, as much as it is something which works with the non-conceptual, it doesn't have the skillful means that the Dzogchen and the Vajrayana has. That said, of course, you do have extraordinary individuals within the Zen and Chan traditions. So it's not really about, you could say, that they aren't extraordinary individuals, but in terms of just doctrine, the Vajrayana is far more profound than Zen. May I know, are there any Tibetan lineages adopt Madhyamika, Svatantrika, but not Prasangika? Thank you. No, everybody loves Prasangika. At the end of the day, nobody can beat the Prasangika. Everybody sort of, bows to them. But like I'm saying, there's certainly within, for example, the Nyingma tradition, there's a lot of appreciation of the teachings that we have from the Yogacarya, and particularly from what we call the Svatantrika. And it's also important that even those traditions that insist on being such hardcore Prasangika, they constantly use all sorts of ways of explaining the relative reality, taking from Sutrantika, taking from Vaibhashika, taking from the Yogacarya. So all of these different tenets, they have a role. They really have a role. But all the Tibetan traditions, they agree Prasangika sort of has the trump card there. They no assertions whatsoever. You can't really beat that. It seems intuitively to me that if we practice Tibetan, I guess you mean Tibetan Buddhism, it is also good to learn Chan, since it is quite cutting through. What do you think? The two systems seem very complementary. Well, we do actually do that when we practice meditation, because we are cutting through the conceptual mind. So everything that's covered in Chan is in fact also covered in the meditation practice that we do in Tibetan Buddhism. The same simplicity. It's just the way that the view is explained is, you could say, the Tibetan is actually often an explanation and the Chan less. So actually we'll be fine, don't worry. How do we perceive wisdom though, if not through our minds? Well, it's understood in the mind, but it's not like that Shantideva says, the wisdom is not understood through the intellectual mind. Yeah. Is it available, a recording or transcript of Dotugo's commentary to the Song of Cuckoos, Join Us? And that's actually the one that I was referring to. I don't know, but I would imagine there would be. Absolutely, yeah. So if you go on kenzavisionproject.org or com, then you'll find it there. All right. Thank you so much for participating, hanging in there. We'll dedicate. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you.
Putting your mind at rest.
Oh, it's super good. Well,
Super fine.
Glad to hear that. So just as always, just a few words on meditation. That's almost self-contradictory, huh? After what we've been through here. how not to get entangled. That's really what, actually, that is what we're doing with meditation. How not to get entangled in conceptual thought. You know, you can think, I'm not going to think this anymore. I'm not going to get entangled in this way of thinking. For example, let's say that you have sort of an angry thought and you just think, I'm going to have to let it go. But you know it's so difficult to let these things go. And you know that if you're active while you've thought, okay, I'm going to stop thinking about this, you know, it sort of happens, it runs like an undertow as it's sort of just, you might even not even notice it, but it's sitting there as an attitude. And so very often we discover actually how difficult it is to work with our mind when we are distracted. And that's for that very reason we meditate. And it's interesting because in Buddhist meditation, again, I have to say, it's never about escaping from the world, but it's getting onto this mind that is always sort of ruling us, our attitudes, our fixations, our opinions, our sort of, and again, this point that is so often, I'm often making, but it's something that I know there's psychological research that tells us our narratives, and I know from my own experience, are just incredibly repetitive. We go over the same thoughts of what it might be, resentment or whatever, one kind or another, or themes that just really grab us. Of course, if you don't have that, then good. But it is where, even so, even though we don't have sort of gross thoughts, we still have this place that we come back to, which is an assumption about a solid self. We need actually to know, you can say our limitations when we practice meditation. It's not just that we're going to go into a meditative state, but there has to be a clear idea of what it is that we're actually ridding ourselves of when we're meditating. So nothing about going into, again, this is very, if you like, prasangika, madhyamika and all of that. There's nothing really that we're intending to actually hold on to, but we'd like to introduce us to this fresh state. Just like if we were to meet somebody without preconceptions. So that's where, well, you could say, well, to meet a great person, you have to have the introduction, the address, some ideas, and why you would even want to meet them in the first place. So yes, we do have a whole body of knowledge that you could say highlights the advantages of nirvana, the disadvantages of samsara, for sure. But in terms of the actual experience that we're engaging, it is very much about us allowing for a clear, fresh mind. And that's where it's rather helpful, instead of us sitting saying, where is that clear, fresh mind, to simply just know, how does the stale, you could say, the stale, repetitive, ruminating, opinionated, alienated mind, what does it look like? Because when we know that, then actually there's something tremendously delightful about having a way in which we don't get, you could say, sucked in and absorbed by these concepts. So the practice of meditation then provides an opportunity where we can connect not with something, but more just be able to not get caught up in what prevents us from abiding in a greater space. It provides the conditions where we don't retreat into, you could say, our self-absorption. So many ways we can talk about this, but especially now that you've been vaccinated against making assertions, you can actually see the value in explaining all of this in terms of what it's not, rather than trying to say what it is. But understanding what it is that drives our neurotic mind, then we can very much appreciate the method of meditation in which we don't let that mind sort of suck us in and drag us along. So to do that, like I started off saying, it's rather helpful to sit. We might want to stop ordinary destructive thought patterns, but we can see it's so difficult when we're moving around. Ultimately, of course, we'd want to, as meditators, not just be confined to experience this one, we're just meditating, sitting on a cushion. But it is overall, even for advanced yogis, very helpful to sit and meditate. I think I mentioned a few times, within the Tibetan tradition, people meditate. Even they might be tantrikas and very much, you could say, have a playful relationship with the world, they still meditate. Particularly in the tradition of Mahamudra and the Great Perfection, where there's not in any way any reliance on, say, having to engage in activities that prevent us from falling into the extreme of just absorption. Yogis who are comfortable moving around still find it very helpful. And you could say some of them, at that point, someone who's not prone to these, what we could tentatively call childhood diseases of being addicted to the peace of meditation, those yogis who don't have that, they actually benefit a lot from the practice of just sitting and allowing some extraordinary degrees of clarity to emerge. So we look at the lives of some of the great sages, even great teachers who would still practice meditation. Dingpo Chinsa Rinpoche, Tuku Urgyen, and many other masters, and also masters that you'd never hear about. All of these practice in this way. So practice of meditation as we're doing it here is both for, you could say, beginners, for those who are on the sort of medium level on the path, and even if you're a very advanced practitioner, this also makes a lot of sense. So strictly speaking, just in terms of what we're doing here, we first engage the presence of the Buddha, really just to have something that inspires us, provides a sense of greatness. And this is very much premised on this deep respect for the Buddha. If you might prefer, you can think of your own teacher or Buddha or Padmasambhava or whatever, but something that really engages something, a dimension of greatness in which there's a humility. When we're practicing this, there's a lot of words of adulation and so on, and it really comes from an appreciation of the place in which wisdom has been fully assimilated and brought to perfection, and that is what we honor in the Buddha. So there's a lot of language that honors the Buddha and essentially paves the way for what we can call blessing, this space in which the ordinary conceptual mind gives way to something that is far greater. So we, when we're practicing, we first take refuge, acknowledging the insight of the Buddha, the enlightened one. Then we develop bodhicitta, the commitment to all sentient beings. And we also develop what we call the four boundless, which is really the thoughts of kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, equally for all boundless sentient beings. So that constitutes the preliminaries. Then we visualize the Buddha, and then we chant some liturgy that really sums up what we call the 7 aspects of puja, or the 7 aspects of service, which are offering, prostration, or bowing down, offering, leaving aside or acknowledging and leaving aside neurotic patterns of action, rejoicing in the greatness of others, what they're doing in terms of the path, and then requesting the teachers to continually teach, and then requesting teachers not to pass into nirvana, and then dedicating all of this really to others, to all sentient beings. And then we have a short liturgy of just invoking the Buddha, and then chanting the mantra of the Buddha. First, what we call the Dharani, which is the mantra of the Buddha, and then we put a Tiyata in front. There's a little bit of there's a place where we usually think of Dharanis as very long sort of mantras, but here it's very short, such. And then the essential mantra of the Buddha. We chant this a few times, and then we dissolve the external reference, or rather we think that from the Buddha, light radiates. And at that point, we understand the Buddha not as merely an external person, but very much as the reflection of our own Buddha nature, which is unobscured. And as such, this visualization of the Buddha radiating light very much is, you could say, concordant with what the Buddha truly is. And then dissolving the reference point of the Buddha, we simply just settle in meditation. And we do this then with a bit of sitting. Then we have 15 minutes of sitting, then 5 minutes of walking, and then 15 minutes of sitting. And then we conclude with an aspiration prayer from the Ratnakuta Sutra, I think it is. And then a few prayers of dedication. So that's what we're going to be doing. So I think actually, yeah, we'll start slightly earlier today. I hope that's all right. Pretty much, I think everybody knows what to do. So anyway, like I said before, when meditating, when then we dissolve the Buddha into ourselves, this is the place where we actually train in not getting entangled by thoughts. And we do so having a good posture. We do so by continually bringing the attention, so that the attention doesn't waver. We bring this back to the breath, just to have something that's not conceptual. We don't sit and wonder what is it all about and so on. You know, you're very welcome to do that, but please do that outside of meditation session. Meditation is not sitting wondering what it's all about. It is actually just sustaining presence. It is essentially focusing on something that's not conceptual, in this case, the breath. And that frees the mind up and provides for a less entangled view. This provides then some insight. So we'll do that. And just now we'll just take a minute or two break, and then we'll begin. Thank you very much. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness in the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering. And may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel lion throne and lotus sun and moon disk seats, the incomparable teacher, lion of the chakras. His body the color of gold, adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the three Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent, he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close suns, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him, and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are as exalted as the white lotus. Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues, the body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed throughout beginningless time, each and every one I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings, accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form body continue always to appear. Through all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future, for the sake of benefiting all beings who are as infinite as space. May you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are then our only refuge. We pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher Bhagavan, Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Jayata Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. 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 Jayata Muni Muni Munaya Soha. Jayata Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Jayata Muni Muni Mahamunaya Soha. Om 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 Mani Muni Mahamunaya Soha. From the Buddha's body, there emanates a great radiance, a multicolored rays, a wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations, and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to rise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. The miraculous display of the unsurpassable wisdom appears as the intentions, deeds, prayers, knowledge, love, and ability of all the Sugatas and their children. May all beings become exactly like them. I prostrate to all the Buddhas and to the Bodhisattvas endowed with the divine eye and the sages, and to the Shravakas as well. I prostrate to bodhicitta, which counteracts birth in all lower realms, perfectly shows the path to the higher realms, and leads to no aging nor death. Whatever negative actions I have done under the influence of an afflicted mind, in the presence of the Buddhas, I fully acknowledge them all. By the accumulation of any merit I have created through the three kinds of activities, may my seed of omniscience grow, and may I attain awakening that never ends. Whatever offerings to the Buddhas that can be found in realms of the 10 directions are known to the Buddhas who rejoice in them. I rejoice in all these offerings. I fully acknowledge all negative actions and rejoice in all merit. I prostrate to all the Buddhas. May I attain supreme wisdom. I earnestly request the Bodhisattvas who reside on the 10 levels in all the direction of the worlds in the 10 directions to awaken into supreme enlightenment. Once you have awakened into genuine enlightenment and tamed the Maras and their hordes, may you turn the wheel of Dharma so that all living beings may be healed. With the sound of the great Dharma drum, may you free all sentient beings who are suffering. Throughout inconceivable millions of kalpas, may you remain and teach the Dharma. Mired in the swamp of desire, entangled in the strands of cyclic existence, I am fettered by all that binds. I supplicate those supreme among humans to look upon me. The Buddhas do not blame sentient beings who are flawed. With a loving heart for all sentient beings, may the Buddhas free them from the ocean of cyclic existence. Any perfect Buddhas who are present, those who have passed away and those yet to come, may I train following in their way and engage in enlightened conduct. Having perfected the 6 paramitas, may I liberate the 6 families of sentient beings. Having actualized the 6 extraordinary faculties, may I reach unexcelled enlightenment. Future phenomena are not born, and those past will not occur. Present phenomena have no inherent nature. There is no actual location. There is no perception. There are no outer things. May I realize the Dhamma Dhatu of emptiness. According to the Buddhas, the great sages, there are no truly existent sentient beings, no life force. There is no truly existent individual and no nurturing of the self. May I realize the Dharmata where the self is not present. An entity such as grasping onto a self and mind is not present within any of the paramitas. To benefit all sentient beings, may I give with generosity, free of avarice. Since things do not exist as entities, may my wealth appear spontaneously. Since all things totally disintegrate, may I perfect the paramita of generosity. Endowed with a flawless ethic that is guided by rules, and an ethics that is completely pure. With an ethics free of an arrogant mind, may I perfect the paramita of ethics. Just as the elements of earth, water, fire, and wind, bodhisattvas do not remain caught by mental constructs. By attaining patience, anger never arises. May I perfect the paramita of patience. Through the power of previous perseverance, having become stable, enthusiastic, and free of laziness, and through a strong body and mind, may I perfect the paramita of perseverance. Through the samadhi where all is illusion-like, through the samadhi of the hero's stride, and through the samadhi that is like a vajra, may I perfect the paramita of meditative concentration. Through actualizing the 3 gates of full liberation, the equal nature of the 3 times, and the 3 types of knowing as well, may I perfect the paramita of prajna. Through persevering in the bodhisattva's practice, may I attain the kaya praised by all the Buddhas, the luminous kaya and the kaya blazing with majesty. Thus may my intention be fulfilled. May I be like the famed Maitreya who engaged in such a practice, perfected the paramitas, and perfectly abides at the zenith of the 10th level. By this merit may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of both old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. We pray for the good health of the teachers. We pray for their precious lives to be long. Activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from the teachers. Akashasya stiti avat yavacha jagataha stiti Tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagatah stiti tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignataha tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignataha tavan mama stiti bhuya jagadukani nignataha. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. So thank you very much for joining us here. Just a few announcements. Like I mentioned, on Wednesday, there will be a program, 6:30 in the evening, which is commemorating Jamgön Kongtrul Lodrötaye, and that will probably run for a few hours. And it might also be something that runs across internationally. Anyway, I'm not entirely sure, but you would have, if you're on the mailing list, received an email about this. This Saturday here in Northern Rivers, I'll be doing a program that starts Friday night, public talk at 6:30, runs to 8, and then Saturday and Sunday, a program that runs from 10 in the morning till 4 p.m., which will essentially be centered around the practice that we just did here, the Buddha practice from Jamgön Kongtrul. And then next Wednesday, again, not the coming Wednesday now, but on the 30th of March, I'll begin a program on the morning of the Wednesdays, running from 9 to 10, from Jamgön Kongtrul's what's called the Sword of Wisdom. And I think most people find this very interesting because it is where we then essentially go into looking into what are the premises for knowledge as we have it in Buddhism, and what are the perspectives that come from that. So this is the Sword of Wisdom study. It will be starting on the 30th of March, and you can get the details, registration links, and so forth on the website. All right, that's all. Thank you very much. See you. May you please also mention that you will be teaching in Europe, Switzerland and Spain in July. Registration is open now. Okay. Yes, shoot me a mail if you are in Europe and you'd like to do some courses. I'll be running in Switzerland and also in Spain. So this will happen in the month of July. All right. Yeah. I'm back on the road. Yes. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for reminding me of that.